Good day. Thank you for joining me and my guest today, Dr. Gregory Roach, on another episode of Leadership Synergized, where we present individuals who represent the best of best leadership, people that I may have known prior that have a positive impact on me, or maybe have understood through reading their work, studying their work from a distance. But Leadership Synergized is based not on constantly being moving, but ensuring that movement is always one step at a time forward through still. Dr. Roach, thank you for joining us again, and congratulations once again on your doctorate that you earned just a couple months ago now, if I reflect back as we record this. But we were talking as we ended the first episode on the strengths and weaknesses and how your work towards your doctorate truly has helped you not put a period on your leadership development, but further fulfill your leadership development. And you're talking about the utilization of your strengths, further recognizing and defining your strengths, but also weaknesses within those strengths to further grow those. Give us and our viewers an example of maybe what strengths stood out to you and what opportunities for improvement through this doctorate work have you identified for Gregory Roach?
Well, I'll start with the opportunities for improvement because that's always easier for me because
I had no doubt.
I can be self-critical, but the clear communication, and I'll go back to 25 years ago, a young athletic director wasn't always the best at getting information to my coaches in an efficient and timely manner. And it caused some problems for my coaches. And I really felt bad about that. So I worked to make a communication a strength of mine. And I think it is, and I think it has been for several years. But writing the dissertation, clear communication, the way you want to present the information in a dissertation to be clear and concise and effective, to where when you're communicating, that what you're trying to communicate is what's being received, whether it's verbal or particularly in writing through the dissertation. That's definitely something that came up in my thoughts as I was working through the chapters of the dissertation. As far as strengths, I think it was certainly one of my strengths is organization and developing a process to work through any tasks that I'm given. And that was certainly true of this dissertation. And getting the dissertation guide that had the headings and subheadings in each chapter gave me a flow that I had a process that really made it was work, I'm not saying that, but made it a process that was easy to follow to get completion of each task that I needed to do throughout the work.
Excellent. I think what I hear you saying is it's just managing your priorities, and
Absolutely.
not necessarily prioritizing your schedule, but managing and scheduling those priorities effectively.
It's all about value base for me and what's the most important issue and working your way down from there. And as a school administrator, sometimes you have a list of 5 things to do in a day and you never get to number 1 because of what's going on. I'm sure you've had those experiences as a school administrator, but prioritizing. And one of the things I've learned through my life is I don't know where it was at some conference, and they talked about efficiency and organization. They said, really try not to task hop unless you have to. So I try to do that. I try to complete things and then move on rather than have 6 things that are half done. And doing a priority order, you get the priority done, and then you move down to number 2, and then you move down to number 3, and you just keep working through. So that's been effective for me throughout my career and even my personal life, having that focus of priority.
Excellent. You used the term task hop. I've never heard that before, but what immediately comes to my mind is this is a complete 360 I've done in my life and career. When I was working outside education and industry in the 1990s, all this offshore movement of going to low-cost regions for manufacturers and things, and that led to fewer workers in the U.S. plants and facilities, but the amount of work needed still existed. That led to this development of multitasking. That's the task hopping I hear you talking about. And I used to take pride in my ability to multitask. I reflect back now that God's removed the fog from my life. I was just fooling myself. I wish I had never developed that task because I think I have a weakness of task hopping way too much.
Yeah. And I was the same way. And like I said, I'd have 6 different things at various stages of completion and then never really felt stressed trying to get everything completed. You go back to industry, the multitasking, I think there may be a direct correlation. This would be a good study for us. A direct correlation to the quality of goods compared to when multitasking started.
I love that. Hey, you're a formal researcher now. So we've got a topic maybe that could lead
There
to a
we
book
go.
or an article, right?
There you go.
So let's dive in. We've set the stage with the first episode and the intro here. Let's dive in to your topic and the difficulty in establishing, because just at least in my experience, you ask your classroom teachers to ensure that the lessons they're presenting their students, the activities to attain that objective per lesson is rigorous and relevant. Same way with a topic of study or a problem statement for a doctorate research.
Yeah, when I committed to pursuing my doctorate, obviously the dissertation is the biggest piece of that. And I threw around some topics and just thought about them and did some preliminary research to see what kind of research was out there, what kind of articles and resources I could have. And then, just to be blunt about it, then the shooting happened in Uvalde, Texas, over a year ago. And from that, my school board started discussion about arming our teachers, or not our staff. And that led me to, do we want to do this? Do we need to think this through? And a lot of discussion with the board and our attorney. And it just popped in my head one morning that part of the reason to arm a staff is to have a quick response to to a shooter that's in your building. The other part that is in question, it would be, does your staff feel safer if you have somebody armed in there? And I have people in my corporation that would be on either side of that. Not very many on the side of they would feel less safe, but there's some thought of, there's a gun in the building and an assailant could take that gun and start shooting, or you could have some kind of accident where you unintentionally injure students or staff. Or the other side of that is, there is somebody that can react quickly if we have an active shooter in the building. So I started narrowing that focus in on, does having an armed staff member, or an armed response team is what we call it, lead to a feeling of more security and safety?
It's certainly a topic very relevant, as you stated, that the instance in Uvalde, Texas, and the prior school shootings that have taken student lives way too much. You and I have talked about this off camera, and at times very near and dear to our hearts, regardless of where these senseless occurrences take place, whether it's in our neighborhood or it's across country, around the world. It's difficult as an educator. It's difficult as a leader. It's difficult as a human being. It's difficult as a child of God not to feel the hurt and pain in our hearts and soul, which immediately leads us all to the question, when does it stop? Because there is no rhyme or reason. And you and I have talked many times, certainly, there are more than one variable at play here. There is more than one variable at play. But as a school leader, that burden that comes on the shoulders of yourself and your peers, it has to be insurmountable. It has to be so heavy at times that you feel like maybe I just can't get out of my chair at this point. Talk a little bit about that burden as a school leader that you feel in working constantly, trying to ensure the safety of your staff, your children, your school community.
Yeah, I would say first, anytime a school shooting takes place, like you said, it doesn't matter where it is, you feel the heaviness of that and the sorrow of that. And then your next question is, you ask, when does it stop? Yes, that's a question. How can we, and when does it stop? The next question that goes through my mind is, when can it happen here? And my point is, it can happen anywhere. So that puts a little bit of fear in you, and it makes you think really deeply. One of the things in transition, one of the things I always talk about with my staff, my students, when I send correspondence to the parents, our number one priority is the safety of our students and staff. Number one. After that comes the education and instruction that we provide. But if we're not safe, nothing else matters. So we try to do everything we can to keep us safe. But then that burden of knowing if it happens here, and the fear, just the fear of it happening here, is a heavy burden. And I've told multiple people, I don't know, from a personal perspective, we could do everything right, have great policies in place. We can practice those policies consistently, not have any gaps in what we do. It could still happen here. and we couldn't predict it. It happens. I don't know as a superintendent by my own choice, other than leading us through maybe the tragedy part of it, how I could continue if it happened in my building. So that's why my focus is on doing everything we can to make sure it doesn't happen and mitigate the responsibility or the time if it does happen. I think about it every single day. And just what can we do? Are we following our own protocols? And I'm pretty insistent on that. My staff would tell you, open doors and things like that. And we continue to make changes as we find out new information and maybe better practices to keep our staff and students safe.
Dr. Roach, thank you for that. And my heart goes out to every superintendent and every building leader, every instructor that has to be aware, because it does pull focus away from the instructional aspect, but there is just no acceptance that what's the word I'm looking for? To your point, it's a daily focus aspect to some level. It's not about just going out and having fun and having lunch with a group of people when you're in your row, or even a classroom and teacher's row, or building principal's row. There's something on your minds about ensuring safety every single moment of the job that you're hired and you've accepted accountability for to execute.
Yeah, I think school level administrators and even administration office administrators, you are always evaluating what you're seeing. Even in a great situation, you have a celebration, a graduation, or just students in the hallways between classes. On some level, we've trained ourselves to be aware, to notice things that may seem abnormal, or checking students. Do they have an angry expression, and how angry are they? And that's, I think, just a segue. That's where it's important to get to know your students very well and address mental health issues. And I think I've told you that before. My opinion, the best way to mitigate or eliminate as best we can school shootings is to really be in tune and address mental health issues that our students face. I think that's entirely hugely important, but you're always thinking about it. Every time I walk into a building, one of our buildings, it's at least at some point in my mind, I'm observing, just making sure nothing feels off or looks off just at quick glance or sight.
Well, I commend you and your peers and everyone in education today with what you do. And it's so difficult just speaking from personal experience, it's so difficult because there's not one right answer to what you're attempting to do to ensure safety. There's multiple parts of the equation. There's dozens of parts of the equation that have to be observed, managed, adjusted, and improved over and over again.
There are just so many pieces that you just have to, you're exactly right. You just have to continually review and revise and do what you think's right based on the information that you have. An example of differing opinions is if there's an active shooter in a building, whether it's a flight or hunker down and wait for people to get there. And if you talk to different safety specialists, experts, you'll get two different answers sometimes. It's just there's every answer is right and every answer is wrong, just depending on how your situation plays out if it happens to you.
Thank you for that, Dr. Roach. Let's jump in, if we can, a bit, because I so appreciate it. I think we could continue talking for hours upon hours about this, because there's so much yet to be done, so much that our hearts want to do. But physically, there's limitations just from time and geography in that regard, but there's so much to be done. Let's spend the rest of our time on your study. Just describe your study, how it was structured, and talk about the results a bit and what you've taken away from it.
Okay, my study, the literature review, I found recordings of school shootings back into the 1700s and then all the way through today. And then it really, in the research I did and the literature I read, the switch really flipped after Columbine in the late 90s. And it might have been because more prevalence of social media, but the focus really became zeroed in on these school shootings and what can be done. And I think the fear and panic that existed from then forward really focused attention even more. And then just the prevalence of school shootings from Columbine up to even today, every time one happens, it's just more and more focused. And I think people become more and more afraid of that possibly happening in their school, whether it's students, teachers, other staff, administrators, or parents. The fear level rises. So my study, I chose 15 Indiana schools, 5 rural, 5 suburban, and 5 urban. I contacted those superintendents and requested they send their survey out. And I wanted to survey all staff members because I didn't want to zero in on just one group. I wanted to know how everybody, all the adults felt in the building. And 3 of those schools, including my own, that I knew they had an armed response team policy in place. And so that would give me at least enough schools to be able to do some data analysis to maybe figure out if there was a difference in the level of feeling of security with those armed response teams in place. So surveys came back. I felt really good about it. We had about 530 surveys, I think 522 surveys returned maybe, which just looking through the numbers, it was a good number. It gave us enough to really have a good data analysis piece to it. The survey, I took demographic data and cross-referenced that in my dissertation for the descriptive statistics. But the bulk of the study was focused on whether they had an armed response team policy in place or they did not, and then a Likert scale from very unsafe to very safe that analyzed their thoughts of security and safety.
And what were the results that you found overall? Any surprises as well in that question?
As the results from the survey were coming in, just looking at the raw data with my eyes, it looked like there wasn't going to be much of a difference. And if you'd asked me to predict just based on looking at a spreadsheet, I would have said, I don't think there's a lot of difference. Just most of them were safe, very safe across the board. But then when we ran the data, if there's an armed response team policy in place, the staff was 4.46 times more likely to feel safer than the schools that did not have an armed response team policy in place, which is a significant number. You give me 4 times anything, I feel pretty good about that.
How much do you feel like the state political environment would have played into responses? Or how much do you feel like individual philosophies when it comes to maybe Second Amendment rights or arms may have played into the responses?
I think with it being Indiana, a more conservative state, we have constitutional carry. So the thought that you should be allowed to have firearms, I think certainly played into it. And I talked about in my defense, if we went to a more liberal state, to say California, or a more liberal city where they have policies that you cannot carry handguns unless you have a permit that's hard to get, say Chicago or New York City, may have been a little bit different results. But I certainly think the conservative pro-gun rights state of Indiana probably had an impact on that number.
How do you take that? You probably have already started taking this, but what's the next step with the results you have in regards to your school?
I've shared with the board that it was a positive. I haven't gotten into the details. We're going to talk about it all in my time, my presentation, my report, and I'll talk about this and I'll go into more detail. And I'll share some of the detailed results of the survey. The staff, we have an opening day in August that I will talk to them about that because I do have some staff members that firearms are, and no pun intended, but it's a triggering issue for them. It makes them fearful just to know that there's a gun in a building. But I want them to know overall, generally throughout my survey, our people feel safer that we have an armed staff member in the building.
And as with any doctoral study, dissertation, and with your defense, I know you had some recommendations on where this study may lead in the future for additional studies, either by yourself or anyone who may come along and review your work, your writing, your publication. Highlight maybe the top 1 or 2 areas that you would recommend for future work in this area.
I think for me to extend the study would be to survey students. They're the first people in the building. So how do the students feel knowing that they have staff members armed in the building? Does it make them more uncomfortable or does it make them feel safer? That would be a primary focus. The second one, if I'm only given 2, because I gave you guys several, would be parents. How do our parents feel? Those are our most key stakeholders, staff, students, and parents, not necessarily in that order, but those are the 3, and the other 2 after the staff, for a total of 3 that I'd really like to know what they feel, how they feel about that.
Were there any of the other recommendations that you made beyond those 3 that are near and dear to your heart that you feel would very much be pertinent?
Those are the 3. but I try to keep my community involved, and I have a very good relationship with our law enforcement. Surveys among those folks would be helpful. I would be just a personal interest level, not so much for Daleville schools, but I would be interested in comparing my results to, say, the city of Chicago schools or New York or California, somewhere where they're a lot less supportive of constitutional carry or any kind of gun owner rights. It'd just be interesting to see how that would play out.
What I hear you saying with that, Dr. Roach, is that a study responding in maybe a contradictory manner with another idea, whether it's armed response per se on exactly how your study may have laid it out, or it's no armed response at all, would be very valuable for both sides of the equation to look at when considering how to best ensure overall school safety.
Absolutely. And one of the recommendations, or a couple of the recommendations I gave in the study, outside of additional studies, were for schools that have it in place, they have something that supports they've made a good decision. For school superintendents and boards that are considering the policy, this is a source of data. And there really wasn't any data, any study out there that I found that even came close to this. And I researched hard trying to find anything before I ever chose it as a topic, and I could find nothing that would give me this information, because I would have felt better, as we're considering policy ourselves, to be able to say it has no impact, it actually has a bad impact, or it has a good impact, which is what my study ended up finding. That would have been good information for me to be able to share with my board. And then at a teacher discussion, I talked to them about the policy coming in place. It would have been good to be able to use that data. If I was next in line and somebody had done this study, it would be helpful for me. And that's why I wanted to do the study. So I knew, and I could share that with our people. But then I'm supplying some data out there, maybe for my friend next door that's considering the same thing.
In the first episode, you referenced, and we both laughed a little bit about the good old days in the eyes of the perspective. I think you would concur. You're quite a bit younger than this side of the microphone today in that regard. But going through the 3 or 4 story old brick elementary school that had the doors open, no air conditioning back in the 1960s, never did I ever cross my mind or believe I would be sitting here talking with someone who's become an expert, such as yourself, on armed response teams for the need of safety of our children. How time has changed.
I would agree. Yeah, I went to elementary school in the 70s and then high school in the early 80s. And farming, rural community, and guys would have their shotguns in the back window of their car or truck. And it was a different day and age. And you talk about doors wide open and, people coming in. And I had to tell my staff this summer when we came back, the research says that nobody's ever been killed that was inside a locked classroom door. And we had a culture where all our teachers left their doors open to be an inviting environment.
Yeah.
And I told them, I was apologetic. I said, I know it's a change, but it's something we have to do. And credit to the Daleville staff, these folks are awesome. And they complied, they understood. And now when you have to go in a classroom, you have to pop the lock open with your key. And that's a disruption to our learning. The students are they've gotten used to that. But yeah, it's unfortunate we have to close everybody in and make sure we're locked at all times, because you just never know.
As you're talking, the feel of the pain and the hurt and just the appreciation I have and the love I have for you and every educator today. Not Daleville, certainly, but not just limited to one school, but around our country, around this world. And yeah, would Dr. Roach do things differently than Kevin Smith, vice versa? Certainly. But wow, the love and the care and the work that goes into not only instructing kids, but loving them, our staff the same way, loving the staff members and working to protect them. It just means so much to me what you do. And I know I represent not just me, but it represents everyone. Children of God, those of faith, those that may be not of faith. That respect is there in that piece. And I wish there was more promotion positively about what you all are doing. And I know there's privacy pieces because there's things about your armed response plan that we're not going to discuss publicly, nor do we need to in that regard, in that setting. But I just so admire and respect and love you for what you do. It's just, I can't compare anything to the work you're doing and the challenge you're doing. And recently, I watched a report by ABC News a year going back the year anniversary to the Uvalde piece. And I know there's been more communities impacted going way back, even to the 1700s, as you stated. And I feel for them all. I can't imagine the tragedy and how you pick your pieces up of your life when those things happen. And there's just no way to devalue the work in my viewpoint, nor should it ever be devalued that you do. And I respect and love you for what you do. And I hope you have an opportunity to present your study and share just like this with your peers, not just in your area, but in the state, through the Principal Superintendent School Boards Association, other mediums and modes, Rotary Club discussions, Lions Club, wherever that opportunity exists. Because I know just like this, they need to have a conversation with you and you have a conversation with them and others who become experts. And there are so many school safety experts out there today. I love them for what they do as well. I just can't express in words enough, Dr. Roach, for the admiration I have, and I represent everyone who respects and loves education and the work you do. And I know I may be rambling a bit, but this is so near and dear to my heart because never, ever should there be a child that doesn't come home to their parents off of a school bus.
Absolutely.
When the parents have sent them to the school. Never, ever should it be accepted that them not coming home is acceptable in any environment.
I completely agree. That's well said.
Thank you, my brother, for your time. I respect you, and I do know that your leadership has grown. My leadership has grown so immensely from your work and study. And again, I appreciate you. God bless you and your wife. And I know you've got a vacation coming up. You all enjoy yourself. And I know we're going to have more discussion on this, but keep me in the loop. I want to hear how you progress what you've learned and taken away forward. And I hope to have a time when I can come up and just see your school and we can talk more about this.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. You're always welcome. I like showing off what our people are doing.
Well, Dr. Roach, thank you again. And thank you for joining us. And I hope you share the heartfelt aspects that Dr. Roach has presented and have gained an appreciation for educators today, whether they're an administrator, a classroom teacher, a staff member, the challenges they face and the care that they bring in working in an effort to ensure school safety for every child in their school system, in our country, and around the world. Leadership can be synergized, not by rushing, but by being still, which is serving, transforming, influencing, and inspiring and loving. And that equals leading from the heart through love, through serving, through coming alongside. Still leadership is all about one step forward. Dr. Gregory Roach has taken that step forward, and you have a chance to do that today as well. I appreciate you. God bless you. Have a wonderful day.